And the thing that we see in Mexico is that many of these big businesses, even if they're making 10, 20, $50 million a year, they're still being run on pen and paper, which was insane to us. An actual pen and paper, I don't even mean Excel. Some of them have some Excel, and those are the technologically savvy ones.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to La Frontera, a podcast dedicated to exploring the dynamic startup and venture capital ecosystem in Latin America and the innovators behind it all. We're your hosts, Cyrus and Tom. If you enjoy this conversation, we invite you to subscribe to our newsletter where we announce new episodes and share additional insights and resources for founders and investors alike. We'd also like to invite you to share this podcast with your friends and to leave a review on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube to help more people discover the show. We love hearing from our audience. You can connect with us on LinkedIn and Twitter by searching for La Frontera Podcast. In this episode, we sit down with Maria Gutierrez Peñaloza, co-founding partner of Nido Ventures, to explore why Mexico may be entering its golden decade for tech and cross-border innovation. Maria shares how her background working in supply chain in Silicon Valley shaped Nido's investment thesis and why they're backing B2B startups transforming legacy industries. We dive into nearshoring trends turbocharging Mexico's economy, the specific industries ripe for disruption, and how Nido bridges two worlds, mobilizing U.S. capital to seize opportunities south of the border. Welcome to another episode of La Frontera. We're here today with Maria, founding partner at Nido Ventures. Maria, we'd love to hear a little bit more about yourself and Nido Ventures.
Thank you, Cyrus and Tom, for having me today on La Frontera. I'm really excited to be talking once more about Nido and the wonderful things that we're up to. So to give the audience a quick overview on Nido, Nido is a VC fund that invests in pre-seed and seed startups that are B2B, and they're bringing technology to traditional industries. What we mean by that is mostly manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, energy, construction, all of these industries that really aren't going away, and they're really big industries. And what we want to see is change in the way that they're managed, but the industries themselves aren't going to go away. So we're very interested in those types of industries. We invest in both the US and in Mexico. And particularly in the US, we're investing in companies that have a certain tie to Mexico. That could be a go-to-market strategy to Mexico, or because they're in supply chain or logistics or transportation, they get involved into things that cross the border. And so there is a Mexico component to them. Nido was started by me and my co-founder, Ana Carolina, almost 3 years ago. We both met in undergrad studying engineering. She's a software engineer, and I studied something called management science and engineering, which is basically something Stanford made up for what I like to say, people that have no idea what they want to do with their lives. And that was me back then. I just knew I liked math and science. And then right after that, Caro and I both went on to work in big tech. And Caro was doing software engineering. I was working in supply chain, and we both liked what we were doing and wanted to start a company together. And while investigating the types of industries that we liked, we ended up finding that there was a perfect intersection with our backgrounds and a potential thesis. So the Nido thesis began with investing in things that we thought we could add value to, and now it has a very particular name 3 years later.
So you mentioned that you guys are pretty much a team of engineers, financiers, operators, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit more about how the difference in your guys' backgrounds, so you with the supply chain experience and then Caro with the more technical experience, can you explain a little bit more about how that factors into your investment decisions, how you guys split up decisions as a firm?
So I think the biggest thing that it does, it gives us a very strong competitive advantage in the environment that we're investing in, particularly within the Mexico VC ecosystem. When we started investing 3-4 years ago as angels, we realized that we were getting into very interesting cap tables because we had these very technical backgrounds. So I was buying semiconductors for Apple previously. So I was on the supply chain team, but I was also very close to the electrical engineers, the quality engineers. I knew how manufacturing worked, and I had seen that firsthand. And then Caro, on the other hand, was writing code for B2B products at LinkedIn. She was also the head of engineering for a startup in Mexico. And so not only the actual writing of the code, but how to lead engineering teams at a startup in Latin America. And so those two backgrounds combined made us a very value add investor, particularly at the pre-seed stage when that's what you want, right? There's capital available, you're starting to create a business, but what you want is for people to help you get from 0 to 1. And we realized that the rest of the ecosystem that we were playing in was mostly coming from financial backgrounds. So people who had been in private equity and investment banking and private banking. And when looking at these very early stage companies, we were the perfect complement to the existing ecosystem in Mexico because we brought the technical and more tangible expertise as operators. And I think still today, we are very much the only GPs with these backgrounds 3 years later in Mexico. So we still bring about the same type of expertise for our companies. And that helps us not only find deal flow, but also be able to refine our thesis. And then the way that we make investment decisions is very much tied to, are these products technically viable? Do we think that these founders are technically savvy enough to build these products? And then on the other side, we're very much thinking about the willingness to adopt and willingness to pay within businesses, because we've worked at these businesses, at the big operators and companies that have already become the multi-billion-dollar corporations that we want our startups to sell into. So I think it's part of the day one, the moment we meet a founder, those backgrounds initially start to kick in our first conversation, and then every single conversation that we have from then on.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes Nido Ventures so unique is just the technical aspect and the Spanish speaking aspect, even though you guys are based out of the United States, among the many other great characteristics that you guys have that make you guys unique that we'll dive into.
Yeah, it's interesting you guys have such a niche focus. A lot of the LATAM VC funds that we talk to, most of them are pretty generalist, right? It'll be Spanish speaking or Portuguese speaking or Brazil, like for the most part, but they're pretty generalist. And I would love to hear how conversations or pitches go with LPs or potential LPs for you guys. You distinguish yourself, like obviously, but what are the LPs that are typically interested in investing in you guys to maybe get some LATAM exposure versus, let's say, a straight up fund out of Mexico City?
There are like two things to that. We do have someone that's full time in Mexico City. So we do want to be constantly that cross border fund. But the reason why Caro and I are still based in the US is first, we do have a US based thesis where we are investing in companies that are coming out of here. But second, what we want is to make sure that we're bringing more capital from the US into Latin America and specifically Mexico. And we've just seen that being here helps us mobilize that capital because we are still considered a local partner. We understand Mexico very well. We have, as I mentioned, like the dual market advantage. We understand how business is done in the US, and then we understand how business is done in Mexico, which is pretty unique. And then we're able to become the bridge between the two worlds in a way that's very easy, or actually not easy, but there's like ease to it from our side. And then the way that we're pitching it to LPs, and especially the LPs that become very interested in this, there's two types. There's one where it's the typical asset allocator that's just looking for high returns that come from venture. And with those is we have an eye for picking good startups. We are seeing all the right startups. We then are able to win the deals because we have a competitive advantage to win them. And then we're going to be able to scale them because we have a competitive advantage to help them scale. So I think those four things, like the asset allocators are looking as to why they should have part of their bucket should include Nido Ventures as their LATAM VC fund. But then the other piece that I think is very interesting is all of the corporations in LATAM that are interested in corporate innovation, which is a big part of our thesis. And a lot of them, 90% of businesses in Mexico are family owned. So most of these corporations are tied to a family office. And those are the same family offices that are investing into funds. And the way that we find like a lot of synergy with these family offices and these corporates is we become a quasi CVC arm for you because all of the types of businesses that we're investing in are directly related to efficiencies in corporations. And we've been very dedicated to that since day one. It's why we're not a generalist fund. We wanted to find something that we could make sure that we had enough space to invest in, but also we became better at partner matching, at being able to be like filter out our deal flow in a way that was very specific. We believe in the specificity of the thesis. And then now our potential LP is also that potential customer for our startups. They're the perfect partner in due diligence. And it creates these beautiful like network effects for a fund like Nido to be able to attract not only the capital, but also the perfect partner for both our startups and the growth of the firm.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And that's, I guess, most kind of VCs now, there are thousands, right, in the US, are pretty specialized or can be specialized. Like I see living in Chicago, right? There's a lot of just like healthcare specific ones or mid-market specific ones, like in the Midwest or something like that. And it
Yeah.
allows you to carve out your own kind of niche and ecosystem and have like really good relationships with others that are doing similar things to you versus being like just straight Silicon Valley, like very competitive on what's the hottest like AI or just what's the hottest thing happening. So it is really cool how you guys do that. And then off of that, I wanted to ask, since you have a unique seat of being very involved in investing in LATAM, but also being in California, right? So you're based in
Mhm.
LA and Acaro's in Silicon Valley. What's the general perception from what you see in the conversations you have of American investors if they're like thinking about investing in LATAM? So what is the perception of investing in LATAM right now? So after the bubble popped and people maybe backed off, how do we get people more participated in that market?
Yeah, I think it was definitely really hot 2020, 2021. Everyone was trying to get into LATAM deals. It's cooled off significantly since then, or at least the FOMO has cooled off significantly. I think there's still a lot of funds that have the right networks and are still looking for the opportunities. And we've co-invested with US based funds in about half of our deals in Mexico. So there are definitely funds that are still looking for opportunities in Latin America, and not only just LATAM, but they're looking for opportunities all over the world. And some of the best ones just happen to be in Mexico for them. It's an easy place to look because it's close to the United States. A lot of the founders that are building these businesses are coming from US schools. So there's like a connection there. So I still think there's some interest, but to answer the second part of your question, I think there's still a lot that Latam can do to get more external capital excited about what's happening locally. And I think it's what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years when capital starts coming back, right? When the early investors of the now unicorns start to get exits and capital starts to go back into the ecosystem, and Latam proves out that it's a place that is not only just creating these unicorns, but is also creating returns for the investors. And that's part of our main goal at Nido, like proving out that's the reality, that there's a huge arbitrage opportunity with investments in Mexico, that the next 5 to 10 years are going to be like our financial golden age, and that
Mm.
capital markets will truly come back and give not only rise to amazing companies, but also give back the returns to the investor so that they can continue to put their money in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great segue into a question that I had, which is what was your fundraising experience like and how did you build trust with potential LPs with, I believe, 75% of capital raised in the United States in 2024 going to just 30 funds? Like, how did you build trust with LPs? Did your angel investing track record help with that?
Yeah, so to place you in when we fundraised, we came up with the idea of making Nido institutional in January of 2022, which was still somewhat of a hype moment. And Cardo and I were like, yeah, everyone's raising funds left and right. We have this amazing idea and we're the perfect people to raise it. So we're going to be able to raise this. And we set our, expectations really high. The day we decided to actually go out and fundraise was June 2022 when the whole market crashed and it became incredibly hard to raise money from then onward. And the last 2.5 years were incredibly difficult for most funds to raise capital, except like a few of the big names who were still getting most of the dry powder, which you mentioned, 75% going to 30 funds. And so the way that most fund ones are raised, and This is even true of people who spin out of the big names, but realistically, it happens. The more of an emerging manager you are, the more this is true. But you're raising from your first and second degree connections, and your first connections and the ones that believed in us were mostly people that said, I would have invested in whatever you were creating. It happens to be a VC fund, so I'm going to put money in, but I would have invested whether it was a company, whether you were coming to pitch me on a movie or whatever it was that you were building, we were going to put money in. And then the second degree connections were people that we were mostly introduced from this like first concentric circle. And there we got access to more family offices and mostly family offices, high net worth individuals that had big references from us given to them by this first concentric circle, or we were able to build a relationship with them over a few months and they got excited. They wanted to test it out with us. But what the perfect way to prove out this theory is a lot of the people that said yes to us within one or two calls. Most of the people that asked for like the 6 calls and the due diligence and the back and forth they end up saying no. They're just looking for a reason to say no, and they're not going to say yes to a first time fund. It's really hard for them to do so. Hopefully in fund 2, a lot of those end up converting, but fund 1 is a gut feeling for them. Do I trust these 2 women to do this job correctly, regardless of what the job really is?
It sounds like a VC fund
Like a
investing
pre-seed.
in an entrepreneur almost.
Exactly.
Pre-seed
Yeah.
versus like Series A or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had some angel track record, but our track record was really like, look, I was able to enter into these amazing cap tables alongside Andreessen Horowitz and QED and Lightspeed and SoftBank and Tiger. And those were my co-investors. And basically I was able to get in because I had this amazing engineering background. So if I was able to get in 2021, I'm going to be able to get in 2023 and 24 when the markets crash. But the thesis evolved, everything about the way that we were investing evolved. So a lot of things did change as we were building out what we wanted to actually invest in. Once it wasn't just our personal checks that I can invest in at whatever valuation and it's my money and it doesn't matter. But when you have a fiduciary duty to take care of other people's money, then rules drastically change shape. So we learned a lot raising this first fund.
Yeah. And I know that I've talked to a couple other emerging managers as well that have done angel investing before. And something that was mentioned to me once was some folks have assigned some other angel investments to their first fund, especially if those angel investments were performing pretty well, so that they can show that they have some sort of track record and provide some benefit for some of those early Fund 1 LPs. Did you guys do any assignment of like angel investments to Fund 1? Did you do anything like that? What are your thoughts on that?
We did do it. We did it with a couple of the investments that we had gone in at better valuations than the height of the 2021, where we didn't think it was worth it to do that to our LPs. So we did do it, and we think it's a good strategy. But realistically for us, it's based on a degree of luck, right? We were so early in a lot of the investments that we made, and we still had a lot to prove out with what we were doing. Some of them have done incredibly well. Others are hanging in there, but we do think we've made some amazing decisions since then. But I think it's a good thing to assign some of them to the first fund.
So talking about convincing LPs, but then also like good decision making. So recently, Trump enacted 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. No comment on whether that's a good or bad decision. But how has that got you guys thinking about your thesis and investment decisions, right? I think Claudia Sheinbaum, president of Mexico, is supposed to be responding shortly on tariffs on the United States exports. But would love to learn a little bit more about that, especially since you guys are so keenly focused on B2B, cross-border manufacturing, et cetera. Would love to hear kind of how you guys are thinking about that.
And how you calm down LPs who are maybe more worried about it than you probably are.
Yeah, to unpack there. First comment is I do think it's a terrible thing, Cyrus. The tariffs just in general. I don't think it's the right way of going about what President Trump wants to do. And to a certain extent, I understand what he wants to do, but I don't think that's the right way of going about it. But that's completely different. And my biggest critique of the whole thing is just there's so much variability in what happens every single day with the administration that it becomes really hard for anyone to respond. And what I think President Sheinbaum has done really well is maintain the calm throughout it all. And I think it's the reason for her like 85% approval rate that we were talking about earlier today, because the other countries involved in the tariffs, the moment tariffs came in, they like were super reactionary about it. We were all going to keep calm, and we have plan A through F. And I'm going to tell you all about our response to all of this once everyone's more calm. And I think she's been wonderful dealing with everything. But that's my first point. Second point is they just announced they're actually rolling back the 25% on automotive suppliers today. So the 25% that came in yesterday isn't 25% anymore for automotive manufacturers. And we can guess where the pressure's coming from there. And I won't mention any names, but I think it's pretty obvious. And I think just generally the thing with tariffs is first thing I'll say is I don't think we'll be in a tariff situation in a year, or at least I don't think this is a long-term problem or a
Mm.
long-term situation for both Mexico and the US. The second thing is, I think the worst thing for us has been just investor sentiment around both countries. So the US looking at Mexico, willing to invest in Mexico, the variability of what happens every day and the uncertainty of what's going to happen tomorrow, I think makes it really hard to make investment decisions, but it's mostly short-term investment decisions. So the way that we're thinking about VC is a long-term game. And what do we think is going to happen in the next 10 years is I definitely don't think tariffs are going to be a problem in the next 10 years or today in 10 years. We would have figured this whole thing out. And the second thing that happens when there's this whole short-term, volatility happening in the markets is that the necessity for businesses, corporations, and the people that have operated with a certain status quo over the past 10, 20 years, their need to be more adaptable, faster, being able to adopt change and have better visibility over their business becomes much higher. And so our thesis becomes even stronger. Like these corporations need to have technology. They need to be able to adapt their supply chains, adapt their transportation, their logistics, the way that they're dealing with their demand, their commerce. So a lot of that, even though it's a short-term shock to the system, I think that long-term people are going to have to be more ready for these types of situations that go back and forth. And so the thesis for us is incredibly strong. If Donald Trump continues with an America First agenda, that also continues to strengthen our thesis because traditional industries in the US are going to become much more prevalent. And so again, need for technology is really strong because labor costs aren't what they need to be here. Raw material costs aren't what they need to be here. So their need to close the gap with technology is incredibly strong. And then the need for Mexico to adapt to having stronger local consumers or finding better trade partners. Mexico is the country in the world with the most free trade agreements. So like the fact that we can turn around and sell to someone else is like a very interesting thing for Mexico. And so I think that finding that adaptability has a big point with technology. And so we're very bullish on our thesis, regardless of what happens. But we do think that the investor sentiment, especially in the short term, is terrible. And that's the thing that we're having to deal with on a daily basis.
Amazing response. Fantastic. It's almost like you've had to answer that question one or two times. But no, I totally 100% agree with that. I think when you look at VC investing, it's so long term, especially when you're investing like pre-seed, seed like you guys are. And especially in LATAM, where the cycle tends to be like a little bit longer, like even for exiting companies. And I think US investors will tend to add that to the list of things of why to maybe avoid LATAM right now. But the thing you have to keep in mind is that it's a very short-term shock. These businesses are going to keep building no matter what. And Mexico and the US are still going to they're going to have strong trade no matter what. That's how it's always been.
Totally. No, and it's a $800 billion trade market. It's a border you can't move. So that's the one thing Donald Trump can't do. He like physically cannot remove the border where it is. So there are certain things that I think are gonna intertwined, the two countries, for a really long time. And also the time to invest is when people are retreating, because that's when the arbitrage opportunities come into play. So that's also our final way of looking at it.
Famous Warren Buffett quote, "Be greedy when others are fearful." I think that's what it was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that you guys have a focus primarily on B2B businesses, right? So why the focus on B2B? Is that influenced by you and Anakaro's background, or did you guys see some sort of unique alpha investing in just B2B startups in LATAM?
It's a little bit of all of the above. Part of what we were talking about becoming a specialized fund, we thought was really important to us. We thought also within Mexico or the LATAM ecosystem is mature enough for specialized funds to start to come about. And then what we were seeing is that B2B has two things. One, if you're able to find good customers, you have big contracts, stable contracts straight out of the gate, because usually these B2B contracts that we're looking at are enterprise level contracts. So they're usually pretty big, stable ARR, which we think is very important for startups, especially at the beginning. And then the second thing we were seeing is next generation taking over of these family businesses that was finally interested in technology. And so there was finally a push and a demand for these technologies to come in. And the thing that we see in Mexico is that many of these big businesses, even if they're making 10, 20, $50 million a year, they're still being run on pen and paper, which was insane to us. An actual pen and paper, I don't even mean Excel. Some of them have some Excel, and those are the technologically savvy ones. And so the jump from being able to be run on pen and paper to being able to adopt like a Databricks type solution into your business is huge. And so we found that gap of infrastructure is the type of businesses that we want to be investing in. Like, how do you get these corporations ready to run on insane data operations, being able to be like the most efficient corporation they can be? And there's like a myriad of opportunities in all the different types of industries that you can think about in that very particular gap. And the other thing that's very interesting is that gap exists also for a construction company out of Florida, right? Like it's the similar type of issue. And so traditional industries have these problems around the world, which we thought was very interesting. And so that's why we like B2B. And then the final like cherry on top is I think I would be a terrible consumer investor. If like someone would have brought me like TikTok as an investment opportunity, I would have been like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. And I remember when it started coming out being like, this is never going to work. And now it's like the most famous app in the world. And so we just think it's part of what we're good at, what we know, and then what we think is the next wave of adoption. I don't mean consumer isn't. I just don't think I'm the right person to invest in it.
I also think I would probably be a terrible consumer investor. Tom knows this, but I typically shun social media, so can't
The
spot those
worst
trends
part
with
is
me.
like I can see the delight in TikTok today. It's perfect. The algorithm throws at me everything I want to see. So now I'm like, I get it. I fully understand why people are addicted to this. But if the deck would have come through my desk, I would have been like, nah, no, thank you.
And one comment also on pen and paper, that's been a consistent theme in folks that we've talked to, that M&A in Latin America is tough because so many of these businesses are family owned or have been in this family for generations, and everything they're accounting is either done pen and paper, Excel, etc. So every time I hear that, it befuddles me. I could never think about doing and running a business on pen and paper. But anyways,
yeah,
I
and
digress.
Imagine the amount of efficiency you can add just by going from pen and paper to Excel and then Excel to the next best thing, right? Like having an ERP system that kind of works, not even one that's perfect, but just something that is able to keep you afloat. It's just exponential. So the value of these businesses can grow immensely. I think that's why I love VC as an impact to an actual country's economy, and the way that I could see it having an impact in the Mexican economy is not just in these potential billion-dollar businesses that we're investing in, but also like the ICPs that they're servicing that are now selling $50-100 million a year that they could be selling 10x that just by becoming more efficient.
thinking about the huge gaps in entire industries or just like the infrastructure in Latin America and other developing economies, and depending on the country, it could be different issues. It's extremely attractive and it makes a lot of sense. And you can help these issues and it'll stay forever. It may not be like the sexiest thing to invest in that just like pops out and everyone's super excited about it, but enterprise
It
ERP,
is not.
that's no, but it's a great thesis. I was talking to some guys at Far Out VC who are also from the UN
Mhm.
Invest in LATAM, and that's their biggest thing. They're like, the opportunity is massive. Not as many people focus on it, but you can make a huge splash and make a huge difference also. And I guess speaking about that, so you guys, I'm sure, map out all pain points, inefficiencies that you see. And so thinking about legacy industries that you're looking at right now, what are some of the biggest ones that stick out in your mind or recently that you're excited about that you either want to see a company focusing on it or do see some companies starting to at least fix some of the issues or go after them?
So we look at two different types of or ways to look at these industries. There's like the horizontal approach where we see like supply chain come in or financial infrastructure, logistics to an extent, like those touch on a bunch of different industries. And then we see like more verticalized things that we're excited about, like mining, energy, construction, agriculture, healthcare, etc. And so we have a thesis on every single one of those. And there's things that I could touch on for each one in particular. But I think that every single month, like a company comes out that surprises me that's doing something that I hadn't thought about. And like, for example, this month, I'm like excited about a company in the insurance space. And I never thought I would say that out loud, but I think it's something that's exciting and could be bringing significant efficiencies to the industry in the automotive space because the automotive industry continues to grow in Mexico and there's still many pieces to it. There's like the big tier one suppliers and there's tier two, tier three, a lot of the smaller ones. Then once the car is built, what happens after? So many different things that happen within the ecosystem. And I don't think there's a single tool that encompasses like the whole ecosystem and how to help get from point A to point Z in a way that's efficient. So we've been seeing a couple of tools there that we're excited about. I think in energy, particularly Mexico hasn't had that much happening in the last 6 years because of our previous administration. The president really wasn't pushing forward any sort of energy products or projects at all. Our current President Sheinbaum's a PhD in energy. I think she has much better outlooks on how energy projects are supposed to develop in Mexico. So if we start seeing the push from the public sector into the private sector for energy to develop, I do think there's going to be many more startups to come about in the energy space that we'll get excited about. And I don't just mean climate tech, but things that are truly built for the grid and how are we making our grids more efficient and how are we getting energy to places that haven't had energy before and the myriad of plants and industrial storage spaces and things that are currently non-operational because they don't have energy that is able to get to them. So a startup that like something like that, I think would be amazing. I can go on and on. Also, we've seen a couple things in the healthcare space that's really interesting. The Latin American space is completely different to the US space. And so the US products don't translate to Latin America at all. So things need to be like more native solutions coming out of Latin America, which I think that gives entrepreneurs a barren land to start doing whatever they want, which isn't the case in other industries where SAP can come in and sell their ERP system to every single corporation in Mexico, but that can't happen for most of the tools that are coming out in healthcare. So healthcare is something that we're excited about as well. And I can go on and on, but those are a few.
I have a couple healthcare companies in Mexico that I can refer you to. So
Send them my way. Awesome. I love it. Live deal flow.
Yeah. Yeah, this happens all the time. So can you share, I guess, like maybe one or two examples from your portfolio that you're specifically really excited about? I remember talking to another VC in Mexico, and we were talking about US investors that are investing in LATAM and talking about AI, right? and some like really cool AI solutions that are transforming things that people wouldn't normally think about it, like let's say like HR or logistics or something like that. And there's like, yeah, Nido's really has an awesome portfolio that you should definitely talk to them about. So I'd love to hear any ones that you're specifically really excited about right now.
Yeah, thank you to those people who said that. I do think we have an awesome portfolio, and I think it's hard to choose one, but you mentioned AI and we were talking about the whole like pen and paper Excel and how to get to a potential like a strong data solution. So we have a company in the portfolio called Arkham, and they are basically AI operations or operating system. And the way that they do things is they're able to, like, first layer, integrate all of your data sources wherever it is that they're coming from. Excel, not pen and paper, but Excel, every single database you've ever constructed, ERPs, like whatever system that you use to house data, they're able to integrate them all in one place. And then even if it's unstructured data, they're able to structure it and then house it all in like layer one. And then what layer two does is that you're able to interact with all of your data as if it all were like one sheet, which I think is really interesting because usually what you have in Excel doesn't really combine with what you have in your ERP or whatever's coming from your MailChimp or some other solution that you have in your business that you want to make sure that data, when it's one on top of the other or it's layered, you truly understand it better, right? Some numbers need to make sense with others, or why they all came in at the same time, or why a financial number makes sense with a physical number of people that were coming into a store, or whatever it is that you're trying to make sense of each other. And the thing that's so interesting about it is that today, businesses that want to integrate solutions like that need to have a team of 20 data scientists. And what Arcam's doing is all you truly need today is like someone in your entire corporation that kind of knows SQL. And eventually, it's not even that. You're just going to need like an IT person that can turn on the computer and show you this is Arcam. And so that drastically changes the way that companies can really interact with their data, which they haven't historically been able to do. So that one I think is fantastic, and it's the perfect like example of going from the pen and paper to Databricks, C3, Snowflake, that kind of world. And then another one that we find that is incredibly interesting is we also invested in a company. This is our most recent investment. It's called FlipSen, and they're doing AI
Mm.
agents for compliance automation. Tom, do you know Maya? You made like
Yeah,
a
no, I actually,
okay.
yeah, no, I actually just taught someone who works for them. He's really good friends with one of my friends, my actually like roommate at Kellogg. And while I was down in Argentina, he talked to me just like asking since I had worked at fintech companies, like any ideas I had or something like that. So I got introduced to them. Yeah, they have an awesome team. We're really interested in what they're doing.
Awesome. Glad I brought it up, but Maya I think is fantastic, and what she's building is basically AI agents that can automate your compliance. Today, she's very focused on fintech companies, so things that financial institutions require. She's working with some pretty big banks already, which I think is wonderful. But usually, there's a lot of things within the compliance space that are very manual and require, again, like going back to unstructured data and how the recent changes in AI, and this is like technology that really changed in the last year, that we were able to understand unstructured data, one, and two, able to really take context into play with AI when AI is able to understand whether something's positive, negative. It's, I think those kinds of things really change the way that these businesses are being run. And so now you can have an AI agent that's able to scour the web and monitor for news for Thomas Barrett and is able to tell the world like, hey, this news article came out and it's a good news or it's bad news or it's neutral and we don't need to care about it. But I think those kinds of things are wonderful because not even humans can do the job sometimes, and it's overwhelming and you miss things and you're tired. And so you have a bot that's just working for you 24/7. And those kinds of businesses are really exciting for us at Nido. So I'll leave those two on the table. But if any of my portfolio founders are listening to this podcast, just know I love you all equally and you're all wonderful.
Yeah, I'm sure we could spend 30 plus hours on your 2030 companies. So we'll leave it at those two and continue in the future talking about all of them.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned when you were talking about Arkham, you were talking about AI. I know that we had briefly touched on how you guys leverage AI at Nido. And that's something that I thought was really unique. There's only like a handful of VC firms out there that I think leverage data science or AI to help them out. So would love to learn a little bit more about how you guys go about leveraging AI to help you guys be the most efficient out there and use your guys' time wisely.
Yeah, I think Gattle's favorite area of expertise. And I think that's why I love partnering with her because since day one, she was very process driven and she's always been that way. And I'm more like, let's just go. Let's do things and let's go. And these are all the ideas that I have and let's just figure it out. And Gardo's like, no, we need to land all your ideas and figure out what we should do first and why we should do it. And should we go ahead and not? And I think it's what's made us a really great team. And I think the way that she thinks about things has led her to be an amazing software engineer. And she still wants to nurture the part of her that's a software engineer within the fund, which is perfect for me. And she's been building a lot of tools since day one, especially for repetitive processes. I think especially like analysts and associate roles at VC firms have become these like repetitive processes where they're just going through news or going through the same 20 LinkedIn profiles that they're supposed to look at, and then 20 decks that they were supposed to look at that day, and then doing research for a certain industry and a memo and things that you repeat realistically like 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, even sometimes it's a week, but things like that that we've wanted to automate within the fund. And it does really two things for us. One, it keeps us up to date with all the technology that's coming out, particularly on the AI side. What tools in AI are coming out that we can use. And it also keeps us up to date, as Scott always says, if she can code faster than one of the founders that we're looking at, then, that's a red flag. And so what we've done within the firm is we record all of our meetings since we started the fund. So we have a lot of data that is very interesting to us, and we want to be able to interact with that data. That's obviously all Nido proprietary, doesn't leave the firm. It's all just for us. And then we have a lot of cybersecurity around it, but we want to know how many fintech companies that I talked to this year, why, what was the general sentiment in my calls, like tone, what did I talk to Cyrus and Tom about a year ago or 6 months ago, and then there's also a lot of research that we can tie to it. So like with tools like Perplexity, which is a wonderful AI tool out there that helps you do research, it's tied to our Slack. And so I can ask my Slack, like, what are top 10 economies in the world? Or tell me more about the coffee industry in Latin America, and dive deeper into the coffee industry in Colombia, who are the top 10 players. And so the way for, especially like our associate, not that the team, for her to build out these industry memos is so much quicker than she would otherwise. And what we want her to spend her time on is relationship building, which we think is the magic of venture, not really knowing who the top 10 players in coffee are in Colombia, but actually being friends with the other people at other funds and being able to have time to go have coffee with a founder and really get to know people in the ecosystem. So those are a few of the things that we've built, but what we want is to just automate all of our back office in one click. That's the goal. A few clicks, but yeah.
Yeah. So actually, speaking about your team, wanted to give a quick shout out to Renata. She's the one that made this happen. We met her in Mexico City, and she's the one that connected us with you also. Just want to give her a quick shout out. Renata, if you're listening to this, thank you.
And Renata is amazing. She's been with us since we started the fund. So she's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. She knows how hard it's been to build this, but also how satisfying and how wonderful it is. We're so happy to have her as part of the team. And we really hope that we can build out this firm with her as we continue to build out more funds on top of this.
So speaking of more funds, right? You guys are wrapping up fund 1 soon, and you guys are transitioning to fund 2. How are you guys thinking about exits from your portfolio companies?
We like to ask this sort of question as like perspective for all of our VC guests. It's interesting to hear like the path of exits or how you think about it and how it's looking now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a pre-seed investor, I think there's three major ways to exit. One is secondaries, two is M&A, three is IPOs. And we think that with the way that capital markets are going, in our opinion, in Mexico, we might actually have the chance as a pre-seed investor to go through the full 10-year cycle and get some IPOs in the portfolio, which I think would be fantastic for everyone involved. And so we're excited to have that possibility as an exit. The more common exit in Latin America today has been M&As and secondaries. M&As, as you mentioned, have been more complicated because of the existing businesses that are today in Latin America are more old school, more complex, family owned, pen and paper, etc. But I think with now the tech ecosystem being more mature, there'll start to be some acquisitions and M&As coming about from like the Rappis and the Clips and the new banks of the world, which we've already seen, for example, with the new bank acquisition of Hyperplane and things like that, that I think have been pretty successful in the ecosystem. And then the third way that we look at it is I think there's been an increased interest in secondaries in the region, and I think that will continue to grow. And as a pre-seed investor, there are some scenarios where a series C or D makes sense for me to exit at. And that could be at the year 7 or 8 of a company. And not necessarily it means that I exit 100% of my position, but there are some ways where we could exit and I think could be a wonderful exit for us. That's the beauty of going in that early and getting in, especially the arbitrage opportunities that we do in regions like Mexico, where at least the apple to apples comparison with valuations in Silicon Valley still is much better in Mexico. And obviously there's the exit risk that's priced into that, but there's plenty of possibilities for us to exit. And I'm not worried, or as worried, I
Yeah.
guess, as the rest of the people in the world seem to be.
Yeah, I mean, market conditions are tough right now, but if you look at exit stats in general for seed investors, is something we talked a lot about with Luis from Bridge LATAM, is that pre-seed seed investors in LATAM, they have great stats. And you can usually find someone to buy one of your companies through secondary, even if it isn't one you maybe potentially see an IPO for, that are just solid companies. And then for you guys, who do you see actually coming in, stepping in and buying these deals like in the secondary market right now?
There's other growth stage funds plus the secondaries type fund. So there's a few funds that are starting to come out and raise now that are based purely on secondaries. And they're either buying directly onto the cap tables or they're buying like a piece of your portfolio. And so there's a bunch of different strategies that the secondary focused funds have. There's other funds that buy pro rata rights, which is also a very interesting way of you keep your entire position, but you are able to sell your pro rata rights for a company and for carry basically on that. So the fact that we're very early stage investors gives us a bunch of rights that at some point get too expensive for our funds. And so that's also an amazing strategy. And then the third one is just later stage investors that instead of diluting the founder will buy the existing positions of earlier stage investors. And that usually happens like angels and pre-seed seed funds. If it comes at the right round and where we'd want to, at a valuation that we think it's worth what we would want, we'd be willing to maybe go out in a secondaries position that way. And I think, as you said, for pre-seed investors, it's definitely an opportunity for exit.
So regarding the secondaries and these secondary funds, something that we've also been really interested in is international investors. They piled into Latin America back in 2021, I believe, and then pulled out in 2022. Yeah. Have you seen any higher interest for secondaries among international investors? Is that maybe it's a little bit less risky for them to enter the region if they invest in secondaries? I'm not sure if you've seen any data about that.
Not necessarily data, but we have seen people who've reached out to us to want to talk about certain companies in our portfolio that are getting to the Series A, and then they want to track them from Series A onward. And they wouldn't buy our secondaries in a Series A, and we would definitely not sell it either, but maybe at a later stage they would. And so we have had reach out in that sense. I don't know if it's increase, decrease. Like, I haven't really looked at whether there's a huge change in numbers. I would imagine it's tied similarly to the early stage interest, where it's
Yeah.
decreased significantly. I do think that is going to change again once, the big, beautiful unicorns that we all know and love start to IPO and or exit in the market, which I think will bring back capital to a lot of people that needed the validation.
This has been an awesome conversation. I want to wrap it up by hitting on one thing that seems to also be a really important part of you guys and your strategy, which is contenido. Like, you guys have
Yeah.
awesome content. Also, another shout out to Jose who puts that together. We also met him in Mexico City. Everyone's getting shout outs. I hope Cyrus shouts me out like this sometimes. But anyway, so yeah, contenido is great content, and it's how I get like a lot of, honestly, information when I'm thinking about Mexico and nearshoring and everything. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about what kind of incepted the idea to push out content and that type of thing, and how it's really played into your strategy?
Of course, and I'm so glad you bring contenido up, because we are very proud of what we've built with the content strategy. And I don't think we expected it to be as relevant as it's become today into what we do and how much we love doing it, but we're very excited that we're here. The whole idea started out with Jose Luis, actually. He was a big part in how we came to be with Contenido, but Caro and I were both at business school. Jose Luis was an undergrad, and he has always been a very eager undergrad, and he's fantastic. Definitely a shout out to him. And he wanted to get more exposure in the VC world. He's a fantastic writer, like, especially he writes contenido in English, but if you see at any time his writing in Spanish is like just beautiful. He deserves like one day to win a Nobel Prize, and I hope he does. And
Gabriel
he,
Garcia Marquez of
Yeah.
VC writing.
yes, exactly.
s-
No, and he one day I'm sure he'll do like novels and things that are much more exciting than
I'm
contenido, but
I'm
hopefully
sure
we're
it's
the
influenced. I'm sure it's influenced by his incredible book collection that he has
yes.
in his apartment.
He has been an avid reader since he was young. He knows so much about literature, and it's wonderful. But I'm going on and on about this without actually hitting on the story. But we started thinking about how there was no content about anything VC in Spanish. And so we realized that our parents had no idea what we did, because they just didn't really understand venture. And we had no way of explaining it to them in a way that was like simple. And this is an article in Spanish about what venture capital means. We looked for it and it just didn't really exist. And so our first contenido article ever was like, how do you translate the word venture capital into Spanish? And we wanted to write content in Spanish for in venture. And then as contenido started evolving, we thought a lot of what we want to do is make sure that the rest of the world also understands Mexico. And that's a big part of what we saw that was even more misunderstood than realistically having content in Spanish. And so that's when we switched to English. We're like, contenido's going to be more about giving people around the world a better picture of what's happening in Mexico, and how Mexico's not way on Netflix, but what, every day when you're living in Mexico, there's flourishing industry, people who are obsessed with technology, incredible software engineers, incredible companies, a VC ecosystem that's growing, and also like an industry that is underserved and has so much still to grow. And then all the other aspect of the traditional industries that we were excited about. And then a lot of it was research that we were already doing. Like, we had to know what President Sheinbaum was saying about Plan Mexico, and what Donald Trump was saying about tariffs, and what the hell Doge means, and what they want to do with the Department of Government Efficiency. And we can talk about that one at a later time. But all of these millions of things that we were having to read about anyways, we're like, why don't we publish about that? And so that's how the Contenido today came to be. So we now have over 13,000 subscribers on the Contenido, which is great. And I think exactly what you guys said about it has been a lot of the feedback. Like people from outside of Mexico get a better understanding of Mexico through there. And then people in Mexico understand venture and tech and the things that we're excited about a lot better from there as well. So we tried to do a couple of articles that are much more technical, and we talk about RAG and how we automate things within the fund and things like that. And it's also been an amazing way of getting people access into venture. So we've hired a bunch of research interns and research fellows that help us do research for Contenido. And what we want them to do is have access into the venture world and what does VC mean. And usually it's hard when you're a freshman or a junior or sophomore to actually get exposure into the venture world.
And your comment about folks have a misunderstanding of Mexico. When we spent time down there this summer, I feel like I got a lot of comments from friends. They're like, isn't Mexico like dangerous? What are you doing down there? And I feel like the narcos of the world, like documentaries on Netflix, have shaped a lot of folks' perceptions of what countries outside the United States look like. And the joke I always talk about is the State Department loves to put those advisories, those travel advisories, and they have a travel advisory for pretty much every single country out there, which is insane. So it's kind of boy who cried wolf. I just ignore them at this point, unless there's a active war in the country, then obviously.
Yeah, I mean, some places, rule of thumb. Yeah, exactly. There's some places that if they're an active war zone, maybe don't go. But
yeah.
And obviously there's some places in Mexico that I would say, hey, Cyrus, maybe this area, don't go. But there's also some places in the US that I would tell you, don't go.
Yeah, hands down.
Chicago.
I live in
Chicago
LA.
scares me more than Mexico
LA
City.
I don't go to.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. Yeah. But yeah, the goal of content, and if you're listening, please go to my LinkedIn profile and subscribe to Contenido. But the goal of it is to have people understand more about why our thesis is what it is, what we're reading about, what gets us excited on both sides of the border, and why people should be excited about Mexico in general, which we definitely are.
That's a kind of a shared thesis that we have. And that's why we started this, right? There is content out there about a VC and startup ecosystem and everything, especially like podcasts. For us, what we notice is a lot of it is in Spanish. And so like the audience that we're trying to reach, and that's just specific, not what is VC, right? It's more like what is going on in LATAM. What we noticed a trend is that there's not a lot of stuff in English. So people on our side of La Frontera we want them to be able to learn about all the great stuff going on too. So along with Contenido, we have La Frontera and stuff like that. But we totally see like the role of education, bridging that knowledge gap between investors, startups, and the whole ecosystem. I think it's a great thing.
No, thank you so much for doing this, because I think it's very much the same DNA that we share.
Yeah, and we're enjoying it a ton too. This has been an awesome conversation. Thanks so much for joining us. This has been fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
And one shout out, or I guess one final thing. I think this is the most shout outs we've had per podcast. So we can only go up from here.
That speaks to the fact that we have an awesome team.
Exactly.
I am very proud to be part of your record-breaking podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And shout out to Cyrus for shouting out all of our shout outs. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Maria.
Yeah.
On that note.
Yeah. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of La Frontera. We hope you enjoyed the show. You can listen to more great conversations on our Spotify, as well as on your other favorite streaming platforms. You can find us online at lafronterapodcast.com, and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for show notes and to stay in the loop for new content. Ciao for now.